Hello and welcome to Reiki Women Podcasts. I'm Bronwen Logan, and today I have with me, as pretty much normal, we have Carrie Varela. Hi, Carrie. And we have Michaela Daystar. Hi there, Michaela. And we would like to talk today on a subject that, or have a discussion about a subject that almost every Reiki practitioner asks about at some point, generally at the beginning, and that is, how do I explain what I'm doing? So how do I tell people? I mean, you could say I'm a Reiki practitioner or a Reiki teacher, and someone says, yeah, well, what is that? How do you explain that? What sort of words do you use? What are your thoughts on that? And I would love to hear from either Carrie or Michaela what you say to people when they ask that.
Mm. You want to take
I
it,
can
Carrie?
go. Sure. Well, first I want to preface that I think it's really important to have these conversations, talking about and creating community, talking with other Reiki practitioners about how we describe Reiki, because there's a lot that can go into it. And if you've ever read like any sort of like, there's this sales book that I've read once called Good in a Room, and it's really just about how to make an effective presentation, how to, win people over in a quick period of time. And that sounds kind of manipulative, but that's not the really intention. It's just like, how can you speak about what you do well in 30 seconds? And for me, that's a constant process, like of refining, of actually being very intuitive also with whoever I'm talking to, kind of picking up on subtle cues from them as like to how open they might be to this whole idea of spiritual energy. Some people might think of that as just totally so woo, I don't even know what to do with you. And then other people I know that are much more open and are like, oh, I totally get spiritual energy. So I just don't understand what Reiki is. So explain Reiki to me. So anyways, I preface that whole conversation. I think it's really important and relevant for us to be, quick and to the point about what Reiki is to our clients, but also recognizing that it's kind of an art, it's a subtlety, it's an intuitive process. So when I have a new client, and if I was pretending either of you were my new client, I'd have to like wipe the slate clean and pretend that I have no intuition about what it is that you want to understand or what it is that I feel like you're inquiring or wanting to know more about Reiki. But generally, I like to say that Reiki is like a granddaughter off the tree of many different Eastern healing arts. And that it's related to acupuncture, qigong, and other Eastern arts that are built around a system of ki or chi, and chi being mental and emotional spiritual energy that moves through you, so that when you die, your chi departs your body. So that's the key of Reiki, ki being the Japanese way that we translate chi from Chinese. And so from this worldview, the energy that surrounds us is also entwined with our mental and emotional life. So if we have a lot of negative thoughts, if we have a lot of negative thoughts, it can build like a cloud of energy around maybe a particular organ of the body, a certain body part, or can just dwell inside of your subtle body. And you can think of that, an example of that might be, let's say if you always have negative thoughts about yourself, and they have this metronome of negative thoughts going on in your brain, like it's really hard to think positively about yourself while also housing all of these negative energies. So Reiki can help clear and dissipate spiritual, emotional, mental energy, so that you can find a greater state of balance, that you can balance your energy. So it can clear, open, and align energetic pathways. And when I'm giving Reiki, it moves mostly through my hands. So in the treatment, I'll be placing hands over your head and other body parts, safe, non-sexual touch, And of course, if you're uncomfortable with if the touch feels too rough or feels too heavy or uncomfortable for you, you can always just let me know and I can do things hand-free or not. So that's usually how I go about describing Reiki, although I've used definitely different ways of describing it too. But that's one of the ways. And so I like to link Reiki back to other Eastern forms of healing. Um, and another example that sometimes I give, like as an acupuncturist might manipulate energy using needles, and awareness of how energy might move through meridians and subtle pathways to the body. And a Reiki practice we understand that the energy itself knows how to balance mind, body, and spirit. And so that I'm not putting any intention to move energy in a specific way, but just really holding space. The energy can move and balance itself naturally.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the the depth and the layers in all of that. When I thought about this question, I started from the perspective of like the casual conversation, like on the street or with, somebody I just met, which is a different entry point than a client, who's in the studio already. And I find that, a big part of the challenge is there's so much that I want to say about it. And I want to make, a lot of distinctions between, the way that I practice from Reiki's origins versus, Western forms. And I want to there's so much I want to say about it. And, for the most part, like in those casual, I just met you, what do you do conversations, right? You really do have kind of, Carrie, what you were saying, like that 30-second, window to open up curiosity about what it is. And so, I did a lot of work with myself to really distill down like what are the most important outcomes that people experience in the way that I teach and work with Reiki. And understanding that my practice is largely centered on teaching, and specifically on teaching from the perspective of Reiki as a self-practice, first and foremost. And so the typical thing that if people have heard of Reiki, they probably are thinking about hands-on healing sessions. And that's a very small part of my practice, relatively speaking. And so, I had to all right, what are the outcomes that people are experiencing as a result of working with me that are, true to what I understand Reiki to be and that are specific to how I work with Reiki. And so I came up with 3. And so generally in that 30-second, I just met you, what do you do conversation, I'll say something like, I help people to build self-reflection, emotional resilience, and spiritual depth by teaching and practicing a system called Reiki. And then if there's enough curiosity, if they want to know more, they might say, well, what is Reiki? And then, we can go down that rabbit hole of information and details. But I found that it really settled my anxiousness around wanting to say all of the right things, right? And to present Reiki in the way that felt the most authentic to me, to really distill it down to those three outcomes that people experience, which are really, the important piece in the introduction, more so than all of the details about what the modality is. Those things can come in conversation. And then, for the more in-depth conversation with somebody who, is in my studio, who has shown up for a session or for a class, what I really find the most important thing to emphasize is that a Reiki session is a collaboration. And it's a space when we can remember and acknowledge that our system, mind, body, spirit, heart, knows how to balance itself and come into wholeness, and is in the process of doing that work all the time. And that in a Reiki session, we collaborate together to create a space that holds at bay the distractions and the things that get in the way of that healing process, that balancing process, where we can, step outside of the things that cause us to forget who we are. And we can, basically be in a collaborative space to support both of our systems in doing what we most need. And then I might go on to describe, using metaphors like, it's like we step into a river together, and that river, moves us according to the shape of, the space that we're in. There's lots of different kind of metaphors that I've developed to just help kind of describe what's happening. But I found that most important piece is affirming that their system knows what it needs, their system is in control of what's happening, and that this is a collaboration, and that healing or balancing or insights that come inside of that space are generated from within each of us, rather than from me manipulating the situation. And yeah, I would say those are the kind of two pathways into explaining what the heck it is that I do, that we take. And I found that the first explanation, focusing on those three outcomes, tends to make more sense and be easier to receive by people who've never heard of Reiki before. That when people have heard of Reiki, again, they tend to have a very specific definition of what Reiki is, which is a hands-on healing session. And my definition doesn't fit into that very well, right? And so that's when often conversations open up, that where we get to kind of tease out some of the distinctions in the ways in which people will understand and practice Reiki, and that there is diversity in that. And I love those conversations.
Yeah.
What about you, Bronwen?
Yeah, look, I pretty much the same in a way. It depends, like both of you said, who you're talking to, so for each sort of category of person, it's going to be slightly different, whether it be in a class or a treatment, or whether it's someone I've just met. If it's, someone who I've just met and they're only just being polite and they don't really want to know what it is, but it's a bit like, oh yeah, I'd probably even make it even shorter. And I would say something like, it's a Japanese meditation practice. That's probably the shortest version that I could come up with, right? But then, of course, there's so much more that I guess that's sort of like the building block, the basic building block, and then adding to that. So a Japanese meditation practice that promotes well-being. Yeah. But I mean, that's sort of what meditation people think of, as doing. But something that I find unique to the system of Reiki and always interesting is that, and it's a practice that I can do for myself and also for others. So that's sort of like another little block that I could add on to that, for example. So yeah, it's sort of building those things depending upon what someone is interested in. And as you were just saying, Michaela, if in one way it doesn't fit into this idea, it's a hands-on healing practice. Yeah, which is sort of, as we were saying, sort of more of a Western concept, I guess. Yeah. So it's actually bringing it from a meditation practice that can be used in numerous ways. So that would be my initial way of explaining it. In a treatment, I use the word sharing. I know, Michaela, you were just using the word collaborative, and I think that's sort of got the same concept. So I say that I go into this meditative space and I share that meditative space with the client, and together we sit in that space, and sometimes I call it a healing space. It depends on the person and what discussion, what they might be open to or not. And in that space, we allow, we let go, and we allow our bodies to balance themselves and find that, that harmony within ourselves. So, yeah, I think it's quite similar in a way, how I would describe the system of Reiki. I guess some of the things, as we were saying, that would be different would be what people may have heard. So what about if someone says, I've been attuned to Reiki? What does that mean? I mean, if people hear that, what do they think? I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, this is like I said, it can sometimes be more challenging a conversation when talking with somebody who already has experience with Western Reiki, because the way that I practice and understand it is so different from that. And so what I want to do is find those places of commonality and places where we can have mutual understanding rather than like places of criticism or kind of distancing, right? And so, if somebody were to say, "Oh, Reiki, yeah, I was attuned to Reiki," and maybe they, let's say they had an experience where primarily what they were, given or taught was that attunement equals Reiki ability and not a whole lot more than that, right? Which I actually encounter quite a bit, right? I was attuned to Reiki and so I can do Reiki but I have limited understanding of what that means. Usually they're not going to say that, but there's this kind of, there's more information here that I wish that I had. And so in that instance, I love to ask people what their experience was, get more of a sense of what their relationship is to it. And, if it's clear that that relationship is primarily attunement and the perception is that that's all that's needed to be a Reiki practitioner, then, I might challenge that a little bit, and say something like, attunement is one piece of the puzzle, but practice is really how we deepen our relationship and our capacities with Reiki. And so I'd love to learn more about what your practice is like. And if they say, "Oh, I don't have a self practice," or then we can just kind of start having that conversation about the different elements. And oftentimes people are really excited about that. They want to know more information. They want to know more details. If they had a learning experience that was limited to attunement, oftentimes they know that they're missing pieces and they're excited to receive them. If I'm talking with somebody who has a lot of deep experience in Western Reiki, then I get to just appreciate that experience and, share my experience learning Western Reiki for many years. And then if there's openness, share some of the distinctions and differences that I am now working with. So again, it depends on who it is and what they're curious about. And yeah, on the opposite side, I kind of chuckled when you said, sometimes you say, it's meditation, because when I'm in that space where there's just a quick answer, or I know the person isn't, it's just a pleasantry, or I don't really want to talk about it, I just say I'm a meditation teacher and just leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder, is that a cop out, but on the other hand, I know because I feel that too. But as you say, I mean, sometimes we don't need to go into a deeper conversation with anyone about anything, right? Now I do have a question as well, Carrie. Maybe you could have a little think about this one. It seems to me, from what we've just been saying, it's almost like there's two. I know we talk so much about like Western and Japanese, and I did like, Michaela, how you talked about finding commonalities, because of course there's heaps of commonalities, right? But on the other hand, there's also this big distinction, and that's sort of what's just come up. And it's like they're almost like two different practices, right? One is where you just don't do anything, and one is, well, actually, really, that's really funny, because within the system of Reiki, from a Japanese perspective, it is about letting go. So there is that aspect of not doing anything, but it's a different idea of being. It's different to that idea of, oh, I don't have to do anything. I don't need to know anything. You know what I mean? Like I don't need to work on myself at all. So what do you think about that, Carrie? I mean, how do we work with that when we talk about the system of Reiki, to someone who may not understand the system or have an experience?
Yeah, I hope that I'm getting what you're asking, because the way I read that was, I think that there's sometimes a little bit of an arrogance in the world of Reiki. And it's like, oh, no, I did a Reiki training. I can give Reiki to myself. So therefore, I need no spiritual guidance from anyone else. I have this do-it-yourself attitude, and I know everything. And nobody can tell me anything. It could be very isolating, and people don't. It's really out of balance, in my opinion. So I think that it's important to be open, open to the world as everybody is our teacher. Like, so that person who comes to me and it says, oh yeah, I've been attuned to Reiki. And that person's my teacher too, because I actually really want to understand and know their experience of Reiki, because they might have this really beautiful, organic, rich experience of Reiki that points me in the direction of this energy that I've been a student of for so many years. But sometimes I can even lose sight of it too. And so I think sometimes that mirror in somebody else, I would just love listening and hearing where people are at and hearing their experiences. So is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was really interesting what you said. And I think that arrogance goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
So, that's what always happens when you have these dual, things, and they, like, it's even then it's like, well, no, I work on myself,
Yes.
I'm so good, right? I do this and I do that. So you've got actually, that can come out of that. Actually, when I lived in Darjeeling in the Indian Himalayas, the area Darjeeling is where lots of people come to learn Tibetan language. So a lot of Westerners go there to learn Tibetan language and also Tibetan Buddhism. So the Westerners that generally live there are people who are doing those practices. And I used to frustrate me because at that point I had very little understanding about Buddhism, but when I would meet a lot of these people, they seemed really incredibly arrogant. Actually, it's a bit like, well, I'm a Buddhist student, and you're not, and I felt really like, oh, that doesn't seem like that doesn't seem like someone who's practicing on themselves, right? But then I have learned as we go on, and it's the same within the system of Reiki. We have that issue too, and it is about that. I always say, now I'm not sure we can swear on podcasts, but anyway, I won't then. But the thing is that we are all messed up, right? Aren't we? I mean, humans, we're generally messed up. And I think people who are attracted to possibly Buddhism and definitely to the system of Reiki are looking for ways to work with their messed upness. So we're not going to be these perfect beings who are like little gods, and we're not. We're actually people who have issues, and we're luckily people who want to work with those issues. But sometimes I think that all still comes up, of course, so we can't say that we're not going to be or we can't say that we're going to be perfect, put it that way.
Yeah, I mean that arrogance can show up in any system, right? No matter what, like there's no particular school or system or way of working that is immune to that energy. And so, being in, like, intentionally stepping into a wide variety of communities around Reiki, I definitely encounter that from all sides. And so, and encounter it inside of myself sometimes, and I know it's like one of the things that I really had to work with when I started stepping out into these communities more was a certain sense of, I guess arrogance could be a good way of putting it, a little bit of dogmatism around, having discovered, the original form of Reiki and taken that on as my form of Reiki, and, moved from the Western form to this form. And, I can definitely track inside of myself a certain arrogance around that. And so, the antidote to that has been compassion and gratitude and generosity, right? Has been working with the precepts and remembering that, my original impulse to work with Reiki and to study Western Reiki for some time, it was an impulse of generosity. I can now see the flawed thinking in approaching Reiki as a very external system. Like, I think of Western Reiki as a very externalized system, where the energy is conceived of as being outside of ourselves, universal energy that we're channeling through ourselves to another person, where, it's primarily one directional, practitioner to client. There's a lot of different ways big and small and subtle, where it shows up as an externalized system versus an internalized system. But what I try to remind myself and kind of root back into is that the original impulse for that, for many of us, is generosity, and it is a desire to promote healing, and that is really beautiful. And so, what I endeavor to do is set a mindset whenever I'm having a conversation with a Reiki person of any lineage, is this person is coming from a place of generosity. Now, they might prove me wrong in the conversation, but if I can hold that as my initial assumption, then we can have a much different conversation than if I hold some kind of lofty, whatever perspective. And from that impulse, that's where we can find those common grounds, and that's where we can point out distinctions, and where there's times when the differences in the two systems or the multiple systems that exist are good and right, and a certain perspective will work really well for some people and not for others. And then there's other pieces that I am critical of, and that I do find causes one school of thought to be less effective than another. But if we again approach each other with respect, with generosity, with an assumption of goodness and generosity with each other, then we can have those conversations, and we can be critical of certain aspects of whatever we're talking about with respect, and have a really generative conversation. And those are the conversations I love to have. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so important, how it's important to relate to each other well, I think, as Reiki practitioners, and not play games of superiority or hierarchy around my Reiki is better than your Reiki. Um and so, I think for me, one of the things, nuances I could add to this conversation is, when I first started Reiki, and I think I was talking about it with somebody else, and she was like, oh yeah, so what I was told was that, because it comes from Yusui, that, you're looking for a teacher that's really close in the lineage up to him. And that immediately put me in this place of like, I don't think I'm good enough, because I remember seeing the lineage tree of my Reiki teacher, and it was like actually like kind of all over the place, because there's a lot of names, lots of people. And I immediately had this thought, well, like, what happens to the generation of Reiki practitioner after me and after me? And, this kind of disconnect through that lineage. And so I think for a long time, that kind of initial impression really stuck with me, and it left me with a sense that like I needed to study with a better teacher, and I'm grateful for that process, because it did teach me a lot about Reiki. And now I can say, even having a conversation with anybody, if we wanted to play the game of like, I know Reiki better than you know Reiki, I could probably win most times, because I'm a total Reiki geek, and I got a lot. I mean, I've like lived and breathed Reiki for years. So, I don't want to play that game. And I know the impact that it had on me back in the day, and I don't want to have that impact on other people, to make them initially feel unsafe or inferior in their journey of wherever they're at in Reiki. And so I'm always really trying to be soft in that space about how to relate to somebody else and their lineage and their experience. So, but I'm grateful for, because that also has guided me too, because that feeling of, I want to know more, and I want to study more, and I really want to understand this craft, because it's my chosen profession, because it's my craft that I have developed. That's led me down an experience of really learning and receiving Reiki on these very deep and profound levels, and given me this incredible confidence around what I do, and how I share it, and the knowledge that I have to share. So, I think we're all on our own unique journey with Reiki. And yeah, I always just I don't want to be a stumbling block, or like a block in somebody else's path, by just doing what I do, which is geeking out about Reiki all the time. So
Yeah, I think, that's the thing about it. It is such a great practice. It gives us so many opportunities to learn about ourselves and fix up all that messed upness, bit by bit by bit, doesn't it? I think when we're doing treatments, for example, and trying to get out of the way, that sort of thing, and that's so hard to do, and all we want to do is bring in our stuff, and giving us the opportunity to just to really let go of all those insecurities that we hold on to. It there's so many different ways that the system helps us with those things. So thank you for sharing that today. I think that's been a really great conversation, and yeah, I hope that people have gotten something out of that. And I think what I got most out of it was really about that, coming to, you use the word soft, Carrie, Michaela used the words, compassion and gratefulness, and, all these lovely ways of us being together and sharing our love of the practice together, and finding ways of interconnecting and being able to talk together and enjoy the practice. So yeah, I hope you also get a little bit of that from this discussion. If you did, please make sure you like us and follow us and do all those wonderful things that you have to do. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks,
Indeed.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.